Welcome, history enthusiasts, to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into the final harrowing chapter of the Pacific War, the Battle of Okinawa. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, this was not just another battle. It was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater and one of the bloodiest encounters of World War II, fought. From April to June 1945, its outcome would profoundly influence the end of the war. So let's explore the story of this monumental conflict. By early 1945, the Allied forces, led by the United States, were closing in on Japan. The island-hopping campaign had been a grueling success, pushing Japanese forces back across the Pacific. The next logical step was the invasion of the Japanese mainland itself. But to launch such a massive operation, the Allies needed a staging ground, a forward base close to the enemy's home islands. Okinawa, a large island just 340 miles southwest of mainland Japan, was the perfect candidate. It had airfields and deep-water ports, making it an invaluable strategic prize. The Japanese High Command was acutely aware of Okinawa's importance. They knew that if the island fell, the path to Tokyo would be wide open. With their backs against the wall, they resolved to defend Okinawa to the last man. This wasn't just a defensive plan. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble called the Tango Operation. The goal was not to win, but to inflict such horrific casualties on the American forces that their will to fight would be shattered, forcing them to negotiate a more favorable peace. To carry out this brutal strategy, the Japanese amassed a formidable force. Lieutenant General Masaru Ushijima commanded the 32nd Army, comprising roughly 130,000 troops, including regular soldiers and local Okinawan militia. But their most fearsome weapon was not on the ground. It was in the air. Japan had prepared around 10,000 aircraft for the defense, with a significant portion designated for kamikaze suicide missions, a terrifying tactic designed to turn pilots and planes into human-guided missiles. Facing them was an invasion force of unprecedented scale. The U.S. 10th Army, under the command of General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., numbered around 183,000 soldiers and Marines. Supporting them was a colossal naval armada of over 1,500 warships and 2,000 aircraft. It was the largest fleet ever assembled for a single operation, a testament to the industrial might of the United States. The stage was set for a cataclysmic clash of titans. On April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, the invasion began. U.S. troops stormed the beaches of Okinawa, bracing for the slaughter they had experienced on other islands like Iwo Jima. But they were met with an eerie silence. The initial landing was surprisingly easy. The beaches were virtually undefended. This was no act of mercy. General Ushijima had made a calculated decision to abandon the coast. Instead of fighting a futile battle on the beaches, he pulled his forces back into the rugged, hilly terrain of southern Okinawa. There, the Japanese had spent months constructing a nightmarish defensive network. They transformed the island's natural landscape of ridges, caves, and ravines into a fortress. Interlocking lines of trenches, machine gun nests, fortified bunkers, and tunnels created a defense-in-depth system that was incredibly difficult to assault. The Japanese strategy was simple and brutal: lure the Americans in, bleed them dry, and make them pay for every inch of ground. The initial American optimism quickly evaporated as they pushed south and collided with this intricate web of defenses. The fighting descended into a brutal close-quarters grind. This was not a war of grand maneuvers, but of small unit actions. Of men fighting bunker by bunker, cave by cave, U.S. soldiers had to become exterminators. Using flamethrowers, grenades, and satchel charges to clear out the deeply entrenched Japanese positions one by one. The terrain was a labyrinth of death, and progress was measured in yards, not miles. One of the most infamous and brutal parts of this southern struggle was the fight for a limestone escarpment known as the Maida Escarpment, or as the Americans grimly nicknamed it, Hacksaw Ridge. This sheer cliff face was a key part of the Japanese Shuri defensive line. For weeks in May, American soldiers fought with almost unimaginable courage to capture this position. The battle for Hacksaw Ridge, later immortalized in film, became a symbol of the ferocious, unforgiving nature of the fighting on Okinawa. It was a place where heroism and horror were constant companions. While the soldiers on the ground were locked in a desperate struggle, the sailors at sea faced their own version of hell. The Japanese unleashed their kamikaze attacks with terrifying frequency and ferocity. Over 1,900 suicide missions were flown during the battle. Day after day, pilots in planes packed with explosives would dive into the American fleet. The constant threat of these attacks put the naval crews on edge, their nerves frayed by endless alerts and the sight of smoke plumes on the horizon. The kamikazes sank 36 U.S. warships and damaged 368 others, inflicting over 5,000 casualties on the Navy. It was the highest loss the U.S. Navy would suffer in any single battle in its history. By June, the relentless American advance had broken the back of the Japanese defenses. The Shuri Line was breached, and the remaining Japanese forces were cornered in the far south of the island. The fighting became even more desperate. Surrounded and with no hope of victory or escape, General Ushijima and his chief of staff, General Isamu Cho, committed ritual suicide on June 22nd. The formal surrender of the remaining Japanese troops followed a day later. And on July 2nd, the battle for Okinawa was officially declared over. The United States had won a decisive victory, but the cost was staggering. American casualties numbered around 49,000, including over 12,500 killed. General Buckner himself was killed by artillery fire just days before the battle ended, becoming the highest-ranking U.S. officer to be killed by enemy fire in the war. The Japanese losses were catastrophic. Out of an initial force of around 130,000, an estimated 110,000 were killed. Only about 10,000 were taken prisoner, a testament to their doctrine of fighting to the death. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Battle of Okinawa was the immense suffering of the civilian population, caught in the crossfire between two massive armies. An estimated 150,000 Okinawan civilians lost their lives. That's nearly a quarter of the island's pre-war population. They died from shelling, from disease, in the crossfire, and in some tragic cases were forced into suicide by the Japanese military. The battle utterly devastated the island and its people, leaving a scar that endures to this day. The brutal reality of Okinawa had profound strategic implications. The ferocity of the Japanese resistance and the sheer scale of the casualties shocked American military planners and political leaders. They had anticipated a tough fight, but the fanaticism on display was beyond anything they had imagined. If this was the price for a small island, what would the cost be to invade the Japanese home islands, defended by millions of soldiers and a fanatical civilian population? Estimates projected American casualties in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even over 1 million. This grim calculation played a significant role in the fateful decision to use a new, terrible weapon. Faced with the prospect of an apocalyptic invasion, President Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb. In August 1945, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed, forcing Japan's unconditional surrender and finally bringing World War II to an end. In this sense, the bloodbath on Okinawa, by demonstrating the futility of a conventional invasion, directly paved the way for the atomic age. Today, Okinawa is a peaceful, vibrant part of modern Japan. But the ghosts of 1945 are never far away. Memorials like the Cornerstone of Peace and the Himari Peace Museum stand as solemn reminders of the immense human costs of the battle. They commemorate not just the soldiers, but also the civilians who perished. And they serve as a powerful plea for peace, reminding us of the horrors of war and the importance of ensuring such a tragedy is never repeated. The Battle of Okinawa was the final major battle of the Second World War, a brutal, climactic confrontation that shaped the end of the conflict and left a legacy of sorrow and remembrance. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this video informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing for more deep dives into history.